Sorry. Good morning, everyone. It's 11 o'clock, so we're going to get started. You can advance the slide, please. Okay, one more time. So I'd like to remind everybody to please put your introductions in the chat and name, title, affiliation if you have one. And can you go to the next slide, please? And we're going to use the chat again just for introductions, posting links, or any technical issues that you need to tell us about. And also, please turn on your camera when you speak. We want to make this as close to an in-person meeting as we can get. Okay, so next slide, please. And a reminder to email your timesheet to Ashley by the 7th. She'll be sending out a reminder to you also around the 1st of the month, early next week. Okay, next slide, please. And now I will hand it over to Chris to get into the meat of the meeting.
Okay, I'm Christine Shirley with DLCD. We reviewed this last week, so I'm not going to spend very much time on it. But I just, for those of you who were not here, I just wanted to quickly go through some vocabulary. So that's the next slide. Okay, so when we assess risk, the risk equation has traditionally focused on hazards, exposure to a hazard, and vulnerability of the thing that's being exposed to that hazard. And the recent IPCC report added the risk of the response approach. And I think that's a good thing to add to the risk equation, because some responses will may increase risk in another part of the system. So next slide. So that's our risk equation. So we talked last week about various ways to assess risk, and I'm just going to go through these really fast. Of course, there's qualitatively describing them. There's a ranking. You can rank things either qualitatively or quantitatively. You can use a matrix to get a two-dimensional assessment of risk. Next slide. You can use an index, and indexes can be simple or very, very complicated. And in addition, you can use curves, such as a depth damage curve, which is a more quantitative way of looking at risk. So these all different approaches can and usually are combined in a risk assessment. So you may have a series of indices, or you may have some ranking in an index, or you may have some depth damage functions along with a matrix. So that the strategy that's used for the risk assessment, it doesn't have to focus on one method. It focuses on the suite of methods and how we combine them to get the information that we need out of the data. Go to the next slide. Oh, and then of course there's event trees. So yeah, variety of methods. They're not mutually exclusive. There probably are more. So one of our tasks that we will talk about later in this meeting is gathering together some information about these different approaches and assessing them for fitness for our use for this risk assessment. Okay. So we're going to move on now to talk about ways that 3 of our state agency partners have used risk assessment models to get information from the data. So do you want to moderate a little bit here?
Okay, sure. Before we move on, are there any questions about the models or the reading from the last meeting? that Chris just went over? Okay.
Did anyone look at the material that the readings that we supplied, have trouble accessing it, found it useful, not useful? I'm trying to gauge what level of information we should share with you. Anyone have any comments?
I think it's worth continuing to share the information. A fair bit of it is useful background, but
yeah,
better to put it out and have people use it as they see fit than not to.
Good, thank you.
Mike, say your comment out loud, please. Mike Grubb?
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I spent about an hour looking at the readings. I found them helpful.
Thank you. And I just realized that I did not share my screen when I did that whole spiel. I'm sorry. Great, thank you, Mike. That it's good to get a little feedback. I don't want to inundate you with background material that may be too rudimentary or in not useful. But we do want to build a common vocabulary, and that was the intent of sharing that information.
Joseph?
Yeah, I just want to let Chris know I'm pretty sure I was watching her screen. Maybe someone else was sharing the material.
Yeah, Ashley is sharing the presentation, Chris. Okay, thanks, Joseph.
No, I realized I didn't share my face, my video.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's still there. And if you have trouble accessing it, I had trouble accessing one, so let us know. In fact, maybe I'll just post the one that I had trouble accessing on the meeting 3 part of the website and add it. Well, it's kind of long. I'll just add it there so that anybody else who has trouble accessing it can get it there. I also found the other article, the one I didn't have trouble accessing, very helpful. Made some good points and made me think about things like cumulative impacts or cascading effects, and I found that there was a figure about vulnerability and how various types of vulnerability relate to one another that I found pretty fascinating too. So anyway, those are my comments.
Great.
So if there's no other comments on this? Y'all are quiet this week. Maybe it's Friday. So, all right. So Matt Williams from the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries is first up. Would you please introduce yourself and take it away?
Okay, jump right in. Yeah, I mean, Marion, it is hard to, I mean, not only is it Friday, but it's also a beautiful Friday. So
I know. It's so true.
Yeah, it is. I find it hard sometimes. So when you can look out the window, oh no, I'm missing out. But yeah, my name's Matt Williams, and I work at Dogami. We'll call it Dogami. I hope you're familiar with that. We did, let's see, so I've been doing risk assessments for about 7-8 years at Dogami. And a lot of the methods that I'll be talking, well, I'm not going to really talk about methods too much, but just the data today. But a lot of the data development that we will be doing for this were developed over those 7 years of doing these. So because there's a lot of similarities, it's just a larger scale, you know, or I guess smaller scale, technically speaking, larger extent. So let's, I guess, let's just go ahead and dive in. You don't need to know too much about me. I do risk analysis, so that's pretty much it. I'm a geographer as opposed to a geologist. So I'm not super versed in the very fine details of geohazards as far as the geology part goes, but I do have a lot of experience doing this stuff. So hopefully I will be clear and describe all this stuff adequately. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, well, Chris already covered this, but just to reiterate, risk is where we have geohazards overlapping with people and assets and infrastructure. And so we'll be talking mainly about how we put this asset data together into a database so we can use it to do the risk analysis, risk assessment. I will talk about the hazards a little bit. I really didn't know what like my lanes were on this presentation. So I'll just be talking about what data we're going to be putting together for as far as Dogami goes for this project. So go ahead and next slide, please. So we did this just a few years back. I'm just going to go over kind of what Dogami contributed to this effort last time. Last time we had one of the main data sets that we had to work with is building footprints for the whole entire state. That was, luckily there was a open source data set of building footprints that was developed by Microsoft in, I think, 2018, probably 2017-ish, let's say. So it was a very good data set. It was come to find out that there was a lot of errors that were in, not a lot, but there was, somewhere between 5 to 10% of the buildings were wrong, but it still was a very excellent data set to work with. So we had that. We also had, we obtained state-owned buildings, state-leased buildings as well, but let's just call them state-owned buildings just for brevity, from the Department of Revenue. We did, and sorry, I'm all over the place here. We did a basic risk assessment on those buildings as far as mainly exposure analysis, and I'll get into what exposure analysis is here in a sec. Historic buildings were provided by the Oregon Parks and Rec. I actually don't know why the D, I'm not sure what it stands for, but it's Parks and Rec pretty much. Local critical facilities were also part of this analysis, and that was developed from, that was derived from the county risk assessments, but also a lot of other sources. I'll get into that here in a sec because I feel like that one was probably the most labor-intensive part of this data development, was putting together the local critical facilities, for sure, actually. Oh, I have it on the next line there. County risk assessments, and then also the previous state mitigation plan from 2015. There was already a data set there that I could work with, and then I developed it from some other stuff that's what I'll get into here in a sec. Okay, so we kept the attributes for these buildings at a minimum because we just didn't have consistent data across the entire state. So there were some places where we had very, very good developed data for buildings in places where we've done risk assessments, but we haven't done that across the state yet. So we really had to keep it consistent. So sort of the least, I guess, so it was sort of like the least common denominator, I guess. That was what we went with. The residential structures were not identified. Otherwise, we could have done an assessment of people at risk, which is one of the things that I think we should strive for. We should try to work towards that because it's very important to do an assessment with people as well. So not just the buildings. I think people are interested in that information. The hazard data sources were mainly from Dogami, but we also got volcanic lahar from the USGS and wildfire data from ODF. And we pretty much did exposure analysis for everything except for the state-owned buildings and the critical facilities. We were able to do a earthquake hazardous analysis for the Cascadia subduction zone and a 2,500 year probabilistic scenario. So next slide, please. So this is one of the reasons why we weren't able to do a more detailed analysis. Again, just I don't think least common denominator is the right term. What I'm trying to say, it was sort of like the minimum, whatever the minimum standard is. So it's basically blank building footprints for like Malheur County, let's say. All we had was building footprints. So that was sort of that was as detailed as we could get because we wanted to stay consistent. But here's what we have so far as a fully developed, we call them UDF. It's a hazardous term, but it basically just means building footprints that have fully attributed characteristics about the building that are relevant to hazardous analysis. So we're getting there. We'll probably by the end of the year we'll be about 75% of the way there, and some of the larger population, mainly it's Deschutes County and Lane County that represent the bulk of what we don't have plans for yet. That would probably put a big dent in that remaining 25%. So we'd be pretty close to having fully developed UDF data for the entire state. We're getting close. I see a hand raised. Sadie.
Yeah, thank you. When is this data from? I'm just looking at this and I'm trying to like coming soon. Is that like coming soon like we have it now because this is from last time, or coming soon like we're looking forward to having it soon?
Sorry, I didn't put a timestamp on this map, but this is current right now. This is what we have at the moment.
Okay.
And soon means within by the end of the year, we should have all this stuff. Yeah.
And is that useful to our purposes with the risk analysis? Is that timely? Is that why it's up there as like soon? Because it will be timely for this time around?
I don't see, this is my first meeting, so I don't know all the ins and outs about this whole thing. But it was just something, I just wanted to put it out there just FYI, because it might be something that we want to work towards. I don't know, but because we are getting close, and it would definitely take the level of detail of our analysis much to a much higher level.
I mean, there's some really big population centers in, these places you're showing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Super. Thanks for the.
Yeah. Ethan, you have a comment in the chat too.
Yeah, I'm sure I can expound on that. I got very excited, Matt, when you were talking about, population layers that kind of correspond with the work that Dogami has done on the building footprints. And so, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead too far, but it made me make a mental note that when I talk in a couple of minutes, I will share those results as well. We agree, like, the main challenge is about information on zoning, land use, building height, stuff like that. So our first take, we did allocation from blocks to building footprints for population, but we've actually, for the Portland Metro now, done that analysis that population is allocated volumetrically according only to residential buildings.
Right.
So really excited to talk about that for Portland. Yes. And great work. We love the building footprints work that you did, and I share every time I can and say other folks using the Microsoft building footprints should take the lead from Dogami and just clean it up, and you can get so much more value out of it.
Sweet. Yes, thank you. Again, it's like, if you can maybe we can go to the next slide, because I can maybe explain a little bit let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to explain a little bit why we can't necessarily put people into buildings across the state. We can't do it in a lot. Well, as you can see, like half the state, we already have that data for, at least as far as Dogami goes. But the issue here is if you can usually what we do is we take assessors data and then we identify residential structures. And then once you've identified residential structures, then you can put people into those residential structures, because you don't want to just spread people over all of the buildings, because then you're going to get just inaccurate results by doing that. So that's why having attributed buildings is important. It has a sort of it has like a domino effect of benefits. So if you can get like, for example, if you can get the year built of the building, which is in the assessor's data, then you can drive what its building code probably is as far as seismic building codes go. So that's an example. But probably the most important example is the occupancy type, which is, allows us to put people into those buildings or estimate how many people are into those residential structures. So I don't want to dive too deep into this, but I'm just showing how enriching this data set we can get even more benefits out of it. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, this is just specifically talking about critical facilities. These on the left is just a list of our categories that we worked with. This is probably what we're shooting for again, but we can develop this. I mean, the basic ones, like the bare minimum, are what we have listed here on the left, but maybe we can through discussions, we can maybe expand on this as we might see fit. But I don't have to read all these off, but these are just your typical critical facilities that I'd say we probably would all agree would fall into that category. I include some of the notable ones, I guess, as I include public works, which isn't one that you would see in a HAZUS data set, let's say, but public works I feel like is something that we should include because of just the equipment and things needed for recovery purposes are often stored in those facilities. Libraries, I see a question here, libraries. I don't include libraries, but that's something, again, we could talk about. Public buildings oftentimes fall in this category because, they're just there. They're there for everybody. So, Curtis, you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much. So I guess my question is I'm looking at the list of critical facility types. I just want to clarify, it seems like we may be missing some pieces, such as communication or dams or those kinds of facilities as well.
Right.
Or energy type facilities, such as the energy hub. I think those are all really important pieces that we need to make right or included.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Curtis, this is Marion. Matt, as Matt mentioned, this is his first meeting, and so he hasn't seen all of the things that we have discussed up until now. But yeah, you're right. We will be looking at some other things. And Matt, could you say what HIFLD open data is?
That's funny because I literally just before the meeting, I was like, what is that? I know that H stands for Homeland, but it's a Homeland Security website where you can download their data sets that are, very relevant to what we're doing here. So I got, right, there's a link.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. You just put the link in the chat.
It's basically federal. It's curated by I think the Department of Homeland Security, and it's just open. It's open data for everyone to use, and it's excellent resource. Excellent resource.
Jeff, did you have another comment?
Yeah, and it's actually there's a public facing and an internally facing site. So there's the open source, and then if you can get permission through, I think there are a couple different paths. You can also get the more sensitive data that's not necessarily shared with the public, but it could be really useful for critical facilities. Actually, so that's not what I was going to ask. My question was, Matt, you made a really important point on the last thing I want to do is just homogenize where people are, which has been a HAZAS challenge over the years. I know that Christina Appleby at Dogami had given a presentation on, I think it's the same thing you're describing that was actually used in response, like some of the big wildfires. I know Checobar, a few others over the years. Is this the same tool, basically the same database that we've been using for some of the large response operations in terms of understanding like what it is that we're protecting, and thus could serve a similar purpose for hazard assessment?
That's a great question. And I actually don't know what the data set they've been using. I'm not sure.
Can Curtis speak to that?
I don't believe so, but if you could re-ask the question, I want to make sure I understand it fully.
So, I mean, it may just be easier for me to try to catch up with Christina Appleby, who's also at Dogami. But I mean, I know that she'd given a presentation on here's some of the tools we brought in that was essentially a critical facility, well, actually just a structural compilation. It was just in the response phase rather in the pre-incident assessment phase. But I was just curious if if this is the same database that we're now using for multiple purposes, which would be great. But I will follow up. I didn't know if you might know it.
No, I mean, I don't know, but I would assume so, because
It looks like it.
I mean, I'm pretty much the only one at Dogami that's working with this type of data. Well, not the only one, but usually people will get it from me. So I'm sure Christina was just referring to a data set that I had put together.
Thanks.
I would imagine. Emma, I see a hand raised.
Hi.
Hi.
I am just curious if like community centers, would those fall under other? I'm guessing, but I'm not sure.
It can. Again, this is something we should maybe discuss, but I do waffle on that a lot when I'm doing a county risk assessment. I never really know exactly, but usually what I do, and we can't do it at the state level, but what I usually do is just ask the community, hey, can you just send me a list of what you consider critical facilities, and I'll just put it in there. That's usually what I do, and it gets a little wonky because wonky might not be the right word. It gets somewhat inconsistent because some counties that are very rural, they will often use, they have some sort of an arrangement worked out with even privately owned companies, like a Safeway or something. They would consider, there's places where they consider grocery stores to be critical facilities, and I oblige them. I oblige them that. I'm sorry I talked over you, but no. But we can't do that here at this level. But go ahead, Sadie. Was that you talking, or somebody was talking?
It was talking, and I raised my hand. Yeah. Hi, Emma. Thanks, Matt. I think what Emma is maybe alluding to is some of the kind of recovery facilities that become critical in the event of a disaster. So we were recently visiting with our commission coastal communities that were impacted by the Otis fire in the Grange Hall, right? Like, I don't see Grange Halls on your list of critical facility types. And indeed, in many or most communities, they probably aren't a critical facility. But I think that's maybe what Emma is talking about, is those kind of like those facilities that would function as a primarily in a recovery scenario. But then my question was, I started thinking about this when you were talking about the household locations, and I'm a little confused on whether or not we have, or you have, are using building data that is, for example, consistent with the building data that the Department of Forestry used to create the wildfire map. And I think that map is still in some state of revision, and maybe there's somebody from ODF that would be able to clarify. I just can't remember the source and genesis. And to the comments of an earlier speaker, it would be nice if we were all kind of like playing from the same deck of cards.
Right.
So I'm just curious if that's the case, and whether or not there's been consideration to that.
I'm gonna, if someone from ODF knows, because I did see someone from ODF on here. You might not know, but I don't want to put you on the spot. But I'll let someone jump in if they want to. Give you 5 Mississippi.
Hi, I'm not actually sure based on that specifically, like what those layers were that were used, and I can figure that out and come back. In most of the stuff that I work with, we use a different process than that WUI map that is in process at this point.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I was gonna also, yeah, that was gonna be what I guessed. I don't think ODF is working with the same data set that we're, I think they might, I don't know. I think they probably either pulled the state, I would guess, I don't know, but I guess that they probably pulled the state building footprint data set that Dogami put together, or they just use Bing buildings.
I think one of the things that I heard was that we had used the state Dogami layer.
Okay.
I think that sounds
building
right.
footprints, but then we also worked with some of the assessors to kind of remove out the structures that were not inhabitable.
Right.
Well.
That's correct. Right. They wanted to avoid like taxing a property owner for additional structures on a single parcel. So yeah, okay. I'm remembering some of the details. Just seems weird that we would have like a wildfire hazard assessment map, right, that does not have any sort of relationship to this other risk assessment map, when that is indeed a risk assessment map. Well,
I think what it is there's the buildings still are just blank. They're just blank buildings. Even the statewide buildings that we put together are they're just pretty much just squares. There's no, I mean, there's some data, but it's more metadata. It doesn't tell you anything about what the structure type is. So anyone that would use that data set would have to develop it anyways. Like we all would have to do that, right? We just don't have one yet that has that sort of enriched attribute part to it.
The
go ahead.
risk map is very specific to some criteria that was doesn't take into account all of the criteria that we are using in this process. And it's really, while the structure footprint piece comes into play after the development of the hazard map, it's really based on other criterias like vegetation, topography, and those kind of things, not related to infrastructure or footprint of building, anything like that.
Okay.
Let Susan weigh in here. She's our natural hazards planner focused on wildfire.
Thanks, Marion. You know, I had a different comment, but so I will not weigh in on the statewide. Well, I'll just mention, I mean, the statewide risk map, the building footprints are used to determine the density for the wildland urban interface. And so where that interacts with the data or criteria that Christy mentioned around, you know, burnability, claim length, topography, and weather. But I was curious, Marion and all, it seems like the conversation around critical facilities is like overlapping with the community lifelines. So, which is that newer FEMA requirement, which I think folks are still trying to figure out, but you know, like things like clean air shelters or gathering places like the Grange, or you know, fairgrounds that might be used for evacuation, staging, things like that, or folks are receiving sites for evacuation. So I wonder if that's like a separate conversation or how that fits into this overall risk assessment, the whole conversation around community lifelines, which could be like that grocery store or food distribution center, et cetera. So just a thought.
So the there is a lot of overlap between the lifeline components and critical facilities, but they're not always exactly the same. The point of Matt's presentation today is to set a baseline for where we are today, so that then we can talk about where we're going from here. So I don't want to put Matt on the defensive about why we don't have this or that or the other. He's just here to explain what we have done in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, I do want to look towards the future too. So we will talk about that is on my radar. I'll just say that, and yeah, I do want to make sure that we are covering our bases here. So yeah, lifelines is definitely something I'm thinking about. Can we go to the next slide actually? And I don't remember. I just kind of we've talked. Let's just go ahead and skip this to. This is just going more into critical facilities, which I feel like we've kind of covered very thoroughly here. And this is just another quick one. These are the hazards that we're going to be looking at. This is just what we did last time. Exposure analysis, if you're not familiar, is pretty much what we're going to be limited to, more or less, as far as the risk assessment goes. It's a overlay. It's taking the hazard. Well, it's the first slide. It's the hazard, and it's the buildings or people, buildings, infrastructure. The overlap, that is exposure. It's quantified in terms of total dollar amount that is exposed. So it's not as nuanced as you would get from a hazardous analysis, which will give you, percentage of damage on an individual building, let's say, which is different. And we just don't have those kind of details there to do a hazardous analysis. It would take a long time to, I don't even know. I couldn't even imagine how long it would take to do a statewide one, but we can do it for smaller data sets like critical facilities or state-owned buildings. That is for earthquake analysis. So because we have statewide data sets that we're working with, which we can go to the next slide, and then I think it might be the next slide. Okay, so the next slide is the reason why we can do earthquake analysis for the state at a statewide level is because of this OSHD data set that Ian Maiden put together a couple years ago. It's the Oregon Seismic Hazard Data Set, and it's full of wonderful seismic information for the whole state. It's great. Highly recommend checking it out if you're interested. And then a lot of these other ones, data sets, the tsunami, flood has been updated. But I was going to say tsunami's the same thing that we did last time. There's no new data there. There's no new data for coastal erosion, lahar. And maybe we might, I don't know if wildfire is going to have new data for in time for this mitigation plan or not. But we might be working with new wildfire data. I don't know. We have new data for channel migration. We have new data for flood. Just the NFIP, the FEMA firm process that they have been updating pretty much, on a probably like a 2 to 3 county rate per year basis. So we have a few new counties that we can work with that have updated flood data. So we can go to the next slide now. Okay, so here's kind of where we want to, I kind of have already been talking about this, but areas where we can make, that we are working with improved data from the last time. So like I said, we've made a lot of, there's several areas where we've done landslide mapping. I talked about the seismic data set. You can see I just slapped this presentation together. Sorry. We have new updated replacement cost information, which is what RS means is. We can estimate the replacement cost that's more in line with our current, replacement costs, as opposed to using something that was, 5-7 years old or so. And then we have the Army Corps of Engineers. I forget what to call it. It's like a web application that has all the dams in the country mapped and with some attributes associated with those points. So probably be working with that. I don't know if I'm the one that's going to be doing that, but it's available. It's out there. We can use it in this plan. And then inclusion of more lifelines. So I'll leave that pretty vague. And it sounds like there is some interest, and we all have our opinions, and maybe we can come to a consensus on, do we want to include libraries, or do we want to include, granges, community centers, things like that. Those would probably be more I would consider those more into the critical facilities, making some distinction, I guess, between, if maybe all lifelines, maybe lifelines includes critical facilities and other infrastructure, or I don't know exactly the correct terminology here, but right now my mind is thinking lifelines as more infrastructure as opposed to critical facilities, just because I've been working with these critical facility data sets for so long that my mind is just like, well, they're just buildings, and then the infrastructure is lifelines, but maybe that's not true. But when I say more lifelines, I mean things like dams, things like, energy, I guess you'd call them electrical distribution points. I don't know. There's lots of things like that, there's a huge list of things like that. So I will be cobbling that data together as best I can over the next few months. And I think that might be it. Is this the last slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have one more.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
Okay, well, thanks, Matt. The agenda said we had about 20 minutes for each presentation and then a discussion. But since we both have, since we've done both together, we'll just continue in that vein, if it's okay with Ethan and Eric to take questions during their presentations. So I'll ask you that now. Yes, and I don't see Eric, but let's see. Oh, Eric says yes too. Okay, so that's fine. So we have until 1 o'clock, and so let's keep, and we need to reserve the last about 10 minutes. So
I got a question.
Yeah.
Marion, I'm sorry, but I have a question. This might be open a can of worms, but last time I did not include any universities or colleges.
Right.
Should we be doing that?
Let's talk offline about that.
Okay.
Okay. So so there are some other, so we need to watch our time so that we finish about 1/4 or 10 of. And there are some more comments in the chat about lifelines. Lifelines are differentiated from critical facilities. They may include critical facilities, but they are networks and systems, like you were talking about distribution of power lines or food distribution or things like that. So they're not necessarily point data, they're more systems data. And we can talk more about that too, Matt, I'll catch you up.
Okay.
And will the type of data analysis, Jay, do you want to just ask your question?
Good afternoon. Yes, I brought up the FEMA community lifelines. I guess, again, this is just my second meeting to sit in on, but it's it's a new category that FEMA's basically requiring us to address, even though there's not really any strong guidance around it. I know it's a way that they evaluate grants now, but again, it's not something that's very well defined for us on the end user to apply. So that's what I was just wondering, maybe is more of just an open-ended question, how a lot of Matt's work like this, if there's a way to translate a lot of this type of data into a way to represent those community lifeline formats. And maybe we're just way too far out in front of wherever that is at this time.
I don't know that we have a answer to your question, like a really good, solid answer to your question at this point. That's what we're working on. We have in the meeting one, if you go onto our website in the materials for the first meeting, there's a scope of work, and it's just it's a single pager that has outlined where we thought we were going with critical facilities and lifeline components. Mostly we're going to be dealing with lifeline components because we're mitigation, not recovery. So we're picking and choosing those things that fit into our framework of mitigation. And they're open to change over time. In fact, at the end of the meeting, you'll see, you'll see, we'll talk a little bit about that, but anyway, I don't think we know that yet. That's part of what this group is working toward.
Okay, thank you, Marion.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Ethan, you can advance the slide, please, and Ethan, you're up.
Thanks. Well, I will apologize in advance because I think especially after such an interesting talk, this one may seem a little bit removed from the immediate concerns, but I will try and talk about how this is connected to the natural hazards mitigation plan. And so the first thing I wanted to share was this approach that we've taken to take census data, socioeconomic data, which feeds into that social vulnerability aspect. So this is meeting that need. Sometimes the census data are not available, though. I mean, they're not available on a gridded basis. They're not available for a lot of planning areas and geographic units that we would use in this and other plans. So this is kind of an example of something that we did with the city of Portland, where they would have wanted to gather socioeconomic data about Portland neighborhoods, which have defined boundaries. They're about the same size as census tracts, but they have a different geography. So we came up with a methodology that would work for that. And then I can talk a little bit too about how this could be changed. One thing, for example, that we've talked about with other folks at PSU is about adapting census data for neighborhood emergency team geographies. So I'm curious if that's like a statewide geographic unit that might be relevant, so that teams who are responsible for a specific geographic area could have socioeconomic data about their service area. So let's go ahead. Can skip through the outline slide and just hop into a little bit. Here's just some background on kind of data that was put together in the past, for neighborhoods or for custom geographies. They tended to only be built from the smallest census units, census blocks. Those are available for each decade and so the profile that we did before was limited to simple things that are part of the census short form that are asked to everyone, such as age and sex. So we were thinking about 2020 doing this again. Let's go to the next slide. But then we realized a couple of things were going to prevent us from doing the same thing in 2020. So in 2020, the Census Bureau has adopted a new method of privacy protection. They have actually kind of a whole chain of methods which involve differential privacy, which is a kind of an algorithmic method to infuse noise into the census data to protect respondent privacy. But it also meant that we didn't, because that has delayed the release, we didn't have any data for 2020. So we came up with an alternate plan. What kind of data could we put together for neighborhoods that maybe didn't come from the 2020 census? Okay, so we go to the next slide. So instead of looking at the decennial, we decided to look at the American Community Survey. It doesn't go down to individual blocks. It's only available for tracts, but we had a limited amount of data for blocks that came out as part of the redistricting data file that was released already. And so we could provide these things on the left: total population, total housing units, occupied housing units or households, and then some information on race and ethnicity. We also put together a registered voters data set on the basis of census blocks. And then we looked at the American Community Survey, which is a household survey that reaches about 2% of people each year. So there is a 5-year product released that combines responses accumulated over 5 years, and that will cover about 10%, a pretty significant number of people and households. And that includes a lot more expansive. It's what used to be considered the long form of the census. So it previously would reach maybe 10% of households. And now it's just on a rolling basis and part of the American Community Survey instead of the census. So we have all these additional variables on socioeconomic status. They're all available at the tract level and higher. And when we start to talk about census tracts, we actually start to get a lot of non-census data available too. So we have things like the Social Vulnerability Index available at tracts. We have things like life expectancy, which is available for tracts, and other kind of tract level variables. The challenge was how to translate from tracts to neighborhoods. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So the first thing we did was to develop a weighting surface, which assumed that a particular characteristic is equally allocated across within a tract in proportion to the population of each block within a tract. And so that's what you see here. The red lines would be a tract and the tract population, and the green lines are individual census blocks and the block population associated. And blocks nest perfectly within tracts. So we can come up with an allocation for something that is correlated with total population size. And it's only a small additional logical leap to say, if we have something that's associated not necessarily with total population size, but with other things that we can eventually measure at the block level and allocate from tracts down to blocks according to that kind of proxy population. All right, so next slide. And so once we did that from tracts down to blocks, we could then reallocate from blocks back up to tracts because blocks again nest within neighborhoods. I mean, there actually is a corner cases where neighborhoods don't align with census block lines, and then we kind of get into this approach and which Matt talked about, where we would actually allocate population from a block below the block level to individual structures, residential structures within a census block, based on information about the structure, such as the zoning of the lot that it's on, the square footage, and address point if one exists, and building height, since we have LiDAR building height. There's a lot of unexplored frontier there, and I'm just very excited to hear that that's something being actively worked on too. All right, so the next couple slides, these slides were prepared for the neighborhood group, and these are probably more relevant for that group. They were interested in kind of what we were doing and how we were going to publish these data. So we took that track data, we recast it, if you will, to neighborhoods, and then published neighborhood profiles. We're actually in the process of kind of updating those now in response to feedback with additional variables. And actually the key area where we're making improvements that this group might be interested in is that we have for the Portland area really great data from ARLIS and other data systems on what exactly every building structure is in the area. So Portland Metro has its own building footprints where we can look at even individual buildings, what share of a multi-use building is dedicated to residential use. So, you know, the kind of thing where it would be a dream to have that statewide, but we do have it for the Portland metro region. So we've come up with these allocation factors where we can actually take census data and allocate people to individual buildings in a block, and then, you know, we could recast that to anything. We talked about doing gridded population. We've talked about doing it for these neighborhood emergency team geographies, and for really any other kind of service area. People could basically, you know, throw up an arbitrary polygon or draw a line on a map, and we could tell you how many people there, and so some socioeconomic characteristics. All right, so that's probably all there is to share from that slide deck. And I wondered now, I'll pivot to talking about the, you know, the SVI and related indicators. That's kind of where, you know, where we entered into this conversation anyway. To begin with, we've developed some tools to disaggregate the SVI into its components and to adjust weights. So when we're talking about different types of disasters or different types of vulnerability, different, you know, purpose-specific vulnerability or resilience indicators, to kind of make those easier to construct and explore the ramifications for how those might look for areas around the state. So I will see if I can share now my my browser and see. Okay, so this is the landing page for the tool that we're developing. Right now, it's still in a beta stage. So we've only got one indicator up here, which is the SVI. We've got like another, you know, maybe 20 indicators planned to go in. And what we've done is look at all of the different vulnerability indicators that are out there. There's some projects that are national level. There are other projects where, you know, states or local governments have done their own. We have like actually several different competing vulnerability measures just in the Portland metro region that have been kind of put out. And so what we've done is look at all of the you know, 150 plus indicators that go into those indexes, and we are putting together all of the metadata on geography, data quality, and so on that are available on those indicators, with the goal of putting them into the state geospatial framework, and through that method be available to users who are pulling that data in through an API or other ways into their maps or their applications. So in the meantime, this is kind of an interim tool that we have to do things like, you know, we've replicated the CDC's SVI methodology, and we made it available for additional years or geographic levels. So I've got up here one of the sub-indexes, but if we look at the overall SVI, this is something, I think I might be in a test environment, I'm not sure. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so that might be a little laggy, but we have it available for tracts, but also available for things like cities or zip codes or legislative districts or public use microdata areas. And so a way that people can very quickly explore, download data for a specific geography, statewide or for a county or within a city. But the key thing here is actually the ability to customize an index. So if you like the SVI, but you think that for a particular purpose, something like the population that is 65 plus is much more important than everything else that's part of that basket. We could say we're not interested in population without a high school diploma. Let's take them out of the calculation. And let's increase the weight on the population 65 plus to be twice as important as every other variable in there. And then we can apply that change and get a new index that's calculated according to the same methodology as the SVI. You have the choice of the Z-score ranking or the percentile ranking that's used in the SVI. And you immediately get a new index for all of the geographies that you've looked at, which you can can then download, add a note, to say adjusted weights on 65 plus, removed percent without high school graduate. And then you'll get a file that has a GeoJSON object, which contains the data that you can be brought right into your GIS, as well as that note which you saved. Eventually, our goal is also to create a kind of clearinghouse where people can save indicators and kind of use each other's indicators, have them all here and generated and annotated, so that you'll have an account with all the indicators that you've created. And also then just to have more indexes. As we're building this, we focused on the SVI and the sub-indicators associated with the SVI, but eventually this will be a much longer list, both of indexes and also of variables. So you'll be able to type in something that you're interested in and filter through, just because there'll be, I think we've got about 185 on the slate to come in. The other thing I didn't mention, which is not really evident here because it's still something we're working on, is that these will include information on the reliability of particular metrics for different geographies. So right now, we've got a color scheme put up here that shows, where the geography lies on the scale in terms of towards the higher end or lower end of that score. We're also going to have some visual indicator on here of reliability, maybe a hash mark for areas where the data will still provide the value, but that will give it a flag that indicates that the data are the noise, given that this comes from samples, statistical samples, the error relative to the estimate is very high. So that's something currently which you do get if you download the data set. You will get both the index that you've created as well as all of the indicators that went into it. And you'll get, for every indicator that went into it, you'll get the value along with the standard error and the ratio, the coefficient of variation, so the ratio of standard error to the estimate. And some guidance on how to interpret that will give you low, medium, or high reliability based on that coefficient of variance. So we're looking on ways to put that more front and center in our in the mapping application here. I guess that's kind of it. I'm probably forgetting something, but like I said, this was kind of impromptu. I planned on having a couple cases that we could work through together with the group, but other things got in the way. Life got in the way. Happy to answer, any questions or comments or feedback. Stop sharing, but I think that if you've got this URL, someone maybe have to let me know if this is if it works on or off. I don't know if this one is set up where it's open, or whether someone needs to be on a VPN. Now we have another URL available too, but
can you drop the URL in the chat?
Yeah, I will do that. Like I said, I know that there is a URL which is open. This is like a testing URL, so I'm actually not sure whether or not this will work for folks, but I did ask our postdoc to share that with me. They're working from home today, and so might be a little lag on getting that to everyone.
No, it's not working for me.
It's not, okay. Okay, I will have to follow up then. I'll share an email to the group. We do have a public URL. This is all kind of hosted on AWS, and the plan is for it to be available to the public. So this might be actually the URL just to load it on his computer, which is of course accessible to me on campus, but might not be available. So I'll share a URL to everyone else.
If you send it to Ashley, she can send it out to everybody.
Thanks. Okay, I will do that. And yeah, actually, there is one thing on that website that I can share. So Marianne shared the main website for our center, and there's one thing there actually which you might want to explore. You can look down. Let's see. I can share my screen once more, and then kind of share one thing you might find of interest there. So, with apologies to Matt and everyone else who correctly pointed out that we should not allocate population from census blocks directly down to building footprints. With apologies, that is what we've done here. This is not intended, of course, for emergency management planning, but just for, initially we created this visualization tool as a way to explore the different legislative proposals for redistricting, and with the data that was provided on race ethnicity of the population. So visitors could look and see whether or not where the legislature was proposing to draw the line, divided groups on the basis of race ethnicity. So it looks like when you're zoomed out that there's really no fancy allocation going on, and that's true. When you're at a zoomed out level, you are just getting dots randomly placed within tracts. But as we zoom in, the allocation of population from blocks starts to become on the basis of individual building footprints. So when we're at a level like this, we are using the Dogami building footprints to allocate population from blocks into individual buildings. This particular visualization was done before we had looked at all the regional data from the Portland metro area, at least on residential use and building height and so on. So it's pretty naively done, but I think that it is something that we're interested in doing in a more robust way, or at least kind of maybe partnering with Dogami on that, and maybe leaning more on their efforts. So that's one thing that's interesting there. There's about a bunch of other stuff there too I could spend all day on, but I think probably that's another relevant thing maybe for this group, and how such a result might look. There's a literature on this. I think the method called the cadastral cadastral expert daisy metric system, I think is what it's called, which is just a fancy way of saying basically that we're allocating population from census blocks down to points using cadastral data on residential buildings, and ideally, which can also use building height and for mixed use buildings. So that's one big challenge too. A lot of mixed use developments sometimes may be inconsistently coded as commercial, or maybe unclear kind of how much of a particular building's volume is dedicated to residential uses. But these are all like, I mean, we can still probably get 95% of the way there, I think, without being 100% perfect. So.
Any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions? Jeff?
Yeah, this looks great. Looks really powerful. I think anything that allows us to be more selective about the indicators that we use, and particularly go, whether it's actually indicator by indicator, but at least saying we like this rather than we're just going to use SVI, is all towards the better, whether we're doing state or for that matter for local users. And then particularly being able to evaluate, I don't know if it would be indicator validity, because that's more than just data. That's deciding, does it fit our needs? But I think that is definitely the way to go. I mean, it's more work, but it sure makes for a more intellectually honest and genuinely useful product, as well as just setting up a better process down for whatever we do going forward. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks. That's great feedback, and that's our goal. I think that I mean, a couple things, different use cases come to mind. I know that one example that kind of was a motivating example for us was sometimes eligibility criteria. So areas have to meet a certain risk criterion to be eligible for funding, and there's some places that might be right on the edge. And so being able to demonstrate that that there is statistical uncertainty in the measure that goes in could be helpful in kind of identifying, who's right on the edge for eligibility. But then, yeah, also the ability to, like you said, not just focus on indicators that are the most relevant for a particular risk, but to actually consider the reliability, the statistical noise around a particular indicator in that decision, and whether or not to include it in the basket is something that we hope will be really powerful.
Also helps build a better baseline. If you're trying to do any kind of resilience index or anything like that, for whatever they're worth, understanding here's where we are today, and that's probably the most important factor for any kind of resilience assessment.
Yeah, and one of the things that I didn't demo, but is the ability for us to also to look over time. So that's potentially exciting too, that we can look at years where we actually have the data, but it's just before the SVI was put together. So, the SVI team never released an indicator for that particular level of geography or for that particular year. And that's something that we'll be able to do too. So people can do more comparisons over time.
Sorry. Marianne, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. I was just curious. I think there's a wonderful professor at your university, Vivek Chandas, who does heat island research. And I remember I think, created a bunch of maps. And I was thinking it would be great to kind of layer the different maps together. Has that happened already?
Yeah, I think that, so you're right. I think that there are two challenges right now. The main one is that we're focused on indicators that come out of nationally available data sets, so that have at least full statewide coverage, and primarily ones that come from, that means they come from the Census Bureau. And so I think that we haven't thought about a way yet to bring in indicators that maybe have only partial coverage around the state. So that's one challenge, I think. But it's not that we don't want to do that. It's just that we haven't. We kind of wanted to start with the low-hanging fruit. And the second reason is that we know that there are. I guess that we know that there are indicators that we want to bring in that will be used in a specific index, maybe demanded by the Environmental Justice Council or by this working group. And so I guess, what's the way to put this? I guess, like there's a tendency, I think, to look at like what indicators are out there and to try to construct an index from it, rather than thinking about what data needs are and then how many of those are met from existing data sources. And I guess that we are biased towards like that more flawed approach of saying, we're putting together all the data that's used in the indexes that are already out there. And so you're right, like we are maybe giving the impression that we're endorsing that as a complete list, which is not the case. I think like it's just a matter of figuring out how to maybe respond to demand from users to bring in additional data. That'll be easy for us to do, but we will depend on kind of input from people on what things should be brought in, and then whether or not folks would like to see things if they don't have statewide coverage. So that's probably something where I need to connect with DAS Geo, because our understanding was like we wouldn't bring things like that into the geospatial framework, the framework data.
Yeah, it's tricky because so I work for public health, and I tend to be fairly pragmatic because we have to be. And so I keep thinking, okay, how can we use this data? Like how do we use this data to decide where to put cooling shelters? Where to put invest in resilience hubs? That kind of a thing. So I love data. So the more the merrier. So thank you for sharing all your great work. And I'll continue to kind of plug around and look to see what's useful.
Yeah, I wish I could say that we'd be a one-stop shop, but like I think realistically that reality will probably continue. That people will have to kind of go around and find out everything that's out there. I think once we finish like our initial big push for data that should be brought into the census and demographic themes for the framework, I think then we will be broadening our look, and that's probably going to start in the fall. We will start looking at things that we know are not necessarily appropriate to incorporate into the geospatial framework, but which are needed by people who are studying risk and resilience. And so there'll be a demand for additional data beyond that, which is part of the framework. And I think we will plan on incorporating that later this year.
Anything else? Other questions or comments before we move on? Okay, then, Eric, you're up. Can we share the screen again? Thank you.
Oh, there we go. I really enjoy watching Ethan's presentation so much. I almost forgot that I was following him. Really great work going on at the Population Research Center, and I appreciate all the data that's coming out of there and the tools. I should preface this by stating that I just put the slide deck together yesterday, so there might be a little bit of self-critiquing as I'm going through there, starting with what was intended to be a working title and never got changed. There's actually a little bit more to it than that. So this presentation will address how natural hazards increase health risks, how existing health conditions are exacerbated by natural hazards in communities experiencing cumulative impacts from things like environmental exposures and social vulnerability. We'll also do a brief dive into health data OHA accesses that can be used to help identify communities with existing health disparities. Next slide. Okay, I actually borrowed this slide from the CDC just to show how natural hazards from climate change affect human health. So different climate drivers, including increasing temperatures, precipitation extremes, extreme weather, and rising sea levels affect health through a range of exposure pathways, including extreme heat, poor air quality, reduced food and water quality, changes in infectious agents, and population displacement. These exposures may lead to negative health outcomes, such as heat-related and cardiopulmonary illnesses, food, water, and vector-borne diseases, and worsened mental health and stress. Next slide. Okay, and this slide actually comes from NOAA, and I think it does a really good job of showing how natural hazards disproportionately affect communities already experiencing cumulative impacts from environmental exposures, systemic racism, and socioeconomic disparities. So for example, as you'll see in the upper left-hand corner, some communities of color living in risk-prone areas face cumulative exposures from multiple pollutants. As we move over to the right, you'll see that older populations often suffer from social isolation. And then down below, as we saw from like natural hazards from wildfires and from heat events, that low-income families are at risk from physical and mental illnesses for natural hazards related to things like crowded shelter conditions. Not only that, but just natural trauma that occurs during those events. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to skip from cumulative impacts to looking at some of the data that we use at OHA to help identify communities with health disparities. And so these are just useful terms for you to become familiar with. The first is the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. This is a CDC-funded survey that is administered by the states where we're collecting self-reported information on health-related risk behaviors, chronic health conditions, and the use of preventative services. Because this is self-reported data, it isn't the same quality as you would get from like a clinical survey. So for example, if we were looking at something like body mass index that's self-reported in the BRFIS, it would deviate some from like a clinical survey. Next is emergency department visits data, and that's exactly what it sounds like. Those are diagnoses that come from whenever somebody visits the emergency department. The Oregon legislature just approved collection of ED visits in 2017. So what that means is that, you know, right now we currently only have 5 years of those data. Hospitalization data, that's data we've been collecting for a long time, and those are inpatient hospital records. Prevalence, it's pretty straightforward. It's the rate of the population who have a particular disease. Prevalence can be either self-reported or come from healthcare records. And then vital statistics data is information on births and deaths. So just going back from the top, the BRFIS data is really great for health outcomes like diabetes because you know, you don't see a lot of patients go into the emergency department or hospitalization directly for diabetes. Diabetes is like the underlying cause for a lot of things, but people usually go in to the hospital for more symptoms than the underlying cause. Emergency department visits are great for asthma data. You know, people there, you know, there are a lot of cases where people go into the emergency department for asthma, but it's much more rare for asthma patients for the response to be so acute that they end up being hospitalized. Where hospitalization data is great is for heart attack data, because most everybody that has a heart attack ends up being hospitalized for monitoring. And then vital statistics data, that's where we get our premature births, and which is a data set that we tend to gravitate to when we're thinking about vulnerable populations. Next slide, please. Okay, these are some of the sources where we pull the data. The first is CDC Places, and that is modeled data that estimates chronic disease, and those measures come from the BRFIS. So traditionally, the BRFIS data is only displayed at the county level, just because there aren't, it's not like a census, there aren't a lot of participants. However, there are demographic and socioeconomic data that are used along with BRFIS responses. So the data is then modeled down to the census tract level. The CDC Places data are those data that you commonly see in national environmental justice index tools, like the CDC EJ index, and also in EPA's EJ screen. CDC Wonder is where the vital stats data goes. And so that's mortality data. It also has data on births, and but the data is only available at the at the state and county levels because of, suppression issues. So it includes cause of death, by ICD-10 codes. So there has to be a minimum of 10 deaths in that, per whatever the geography that's being used, in order for those data to be reported. And so there would end up being, if you're down at the tract level, there would be a lot of data suppression. The next source is the CDC Tracking Data Explorer. This site includes environmental exposures, demographics, health outcomes, and those health outcomes can come from either hospitalizations, ED visits, the BRFIS, or vital statistics when it comes to reproductive outcomes. By and large, currently, the health outcomes are going to be at the state and county levels, but CDC is working on getting tract level data for ED visits for asthma and also hospitalizations for heart attacks. They're also looking at all cancer types to see if they can provide the data at the tract level currently without too much suppression. Next is the Oregon Tracking Data Explorer. The Oregon Tracking Program is funded by CDC. They provide health outcome and environmental data to the CDC to be hosted on their website. However, a portion of that data is also hosted by the state of Oregon on the Oregon Tracking Data Explorer. There are some additional unique indicators on the Tracking Data Explorer, like the food environment, that doesn't exist currently on the CDC Data Explorer. And then finally is the Oregon Tracking Program. So the Oregon Tracking team has access to data from health analytics, and that data is all geocoded. So it can be aggregated to whatever the geography type is, as long as there are enough cases so that the data doesn't have to be suppressed. And one way that we are able to get around that is by aggregating 5 years of data together. And so we have access to ED visits, hospitalizations, syndromic surveillance data, and vital statistics. With regard to natural hazards and heat-related illnesses, we're just starting to explore whether we will be able to provide those data at the county level. I mean, there just aren't enough cases statewide. So anyway, I know that there are probably questions out there about, would we be able to provide heat-related illnesses at the tract level? And the answer is probably not, except in some urban areas. Next slide, please. Okay, and these are just links to those sources that I mentioned. So when we share the slides, that you guys will have access to those links. And in the 4 top links, all the data is downloadable. Next slide. And this is just to show, other data that OHA maintains. And by the way, I'm just scratching the surface as far as health-related data maintained by OHA. When I list these off, the data sources I'd mentioned before are sources that you would traditionally see in like an environmental justice index tool or for a natural hazards risk assessment. Next slide. And you know, just to stay with the theme of the natural hazards risk assessment, these are data that show where health professional shortage areas are throughout the state. The screen capture that I found here, the map I found is a little bit dated, but I know the data has been updated since then, you know, particularly with everything that's gone on with the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, everybody, questions, thoughts, comments, suggestions, concerns? No? Okay. Yes.
All right, Marion, we got you in on time.
Yeah, even a little early. So because we have a few extra minutes, does anybody want to go back and ask other questions that you might not have asked before? No? Okay. So thank you. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we're going to talk about what we need you to do for the next meeting. Next slide. Okay, Chris, this is yours.
Okay, I'll turn on my camera this time. Okay, so I sent my camera's on. Okay, I sent my some very basic resources to you to develop a common language. And now we're going to ask you to dig even deeper into the research. So Jeff and others and myself and Marion, we've contributed material to a Box account. Marion will tell you in a minute if that Box account is up and running. But there's a bunch of material in there about various sites, methods, natural hazard risk assessments that have been done elsewhere. And we would like you to pick up one or two of those articles or sites, take a look at it, and complete a table entry that addresses the questions of, is this assessment done in a GIS environment? And if so, did you look at it? Was it useful? Which risk propellers, meaning was it exposure? Did it get into vulnerability? Did it talk about adaptation measures and the risks from those? What methods were used for the study or the site? And what questions did the articles bring up for you, or insights or whatever? And our thought here is, first of all, to encourage you to look at the articles, but not have to read every single one of them. And then also to do a little crowdsourcing in evaluating these articles. So we're hoping that you can pick one and do your assessment, which we will share with everyone by May 9th. And we will be putting a form in a Box account that you can use to fill out to assemble comments from various people. So Marion, do you want to say something about that Box account?
There is a Box account. I have not populated anything in it yet. Have you?
No.
Oh, okay. It will be populated, and we'll send you the Box invitation by Tuesday, so you can get in there and get the form and start deciding what you are interested in looking at. You don't have to limit yourself to one, but we'd be appreciative. And also, this cheat will be in there. So as you sign up for things, if you come in later on, please pick something that someone else hasn't already picked, so that we can get as much coverage as possible. There was also, I think I missed one question here, to start discussing with your agencies how your GIS folks process complex information. Do you want to talk more about that, Chris?
Yeah, so as I described earlier in this presentation and at the last meeting, there are many ways to summarize complex information. I'm asking those of you who have contact with your GIS departments to ask them, or if you are yourself a GIS analyst or use it, how do you summarize information? And what techniques have you found particularly useful or challenging? This is setting us up again for more discussion about the strategy that we will use to build our own system. So again, a little crowdsourcing to help us understand more about what is useful and what you find challenging in summarizing complex information, or complex data.
Okay,
Again,
so,
you know,
go
pardon?
Ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, our intent is to take a lot of data and turn it into useful information. So any techniques that do that for you, we'd like to learn more about.
Okay, so we'll change this to request 1 of 3. We'll add another slide before we post it on our webpage so that it can serve as a reminder. And the second request we have today, can you go 1 slide, please? Thank you. Last couple of meetings, we talked about a survey, and we've started to draft the survey, and we want your input. So also in that box account, we will populate it with the survey questions, and also just like the whole, any background information that we give, and just the whole survey as we think it would go out, and ask you to comment on that. Are we asking the right questions? Will we be gathering the data that we need? What other questions should we ask? Do we have too much or not enough information explaining what we're doing or why we're asking the question, or what our purpose is? And again, those will be in the box count on Tuesday, and you can upload your comments, please, by May 9th again. So this piece of the survey is for folks who own or operate lifeline components and critical facilities. And we are still working on the other 2 audiences, so we'll get back to you on those. But this is the first one we want to ask you to review and comment on for us. Questions on any of this? Concerns? Suggestions?
No, Marian, this is Sadie. Sorry, I had to step away for a moment, so I hope you weren't calling on me. But I just want to say to everybody in advance, thank you for taking the opportunity to review the survey. I'm really optimistic about what we can learn through it, and I'm hopeful that the data we capture will really be useful in helping us understand these FEMA lifelines that we were talking about earlier that are in this sort of like nebulous, undefined, unguided state. My hope is that this survey can be, can provide some powerful information from a large number of people around the state in terms of learning more about vulnerabilities to those systems, those community lifelines. So if you have the opportunity to review, if you if you see faults in it, I'm very eager to hear your feedback. I'm a big fan of surveys. I'm a big fan of this work, and so I'm really excited to see what comes out of your feedback. So thank you all.
Sadie, Sadie is a DLCD employee. She's on our project management team, and she's our public information. What exactly is your title?
So I do, communication and community engagement with DLCD, and I have I'm not a statistical analyst by any means, but I have over the years developed many different survey tools. And so we're hoping to bring some of that to this group. But yeah, my sort of fitness here is with the community engagement side of things, because of course with a survey, we can distribute it broadly, right? We can use this group to help us amplify it. We can use your networks to pass it along. We can get it in front of the right people. And then we can get some quantifiable data back in our hands to help us build a better tool.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Any questions, comments, anything about this? Okay. Then let's move along to the next slide. Anybody here from the community who would like to make a comment or voice a concern or a question? Okay, the next slide. We're done. Thank you. Thank you for coming on a Friday and over the lunch hour. We will try to avoid this in the future. It was just a very difficult week to schedule this week. So we really appreciate all you being here and taking your time in your lunch hours in this beautiful day, and hope you enjoy the nice weather this weekend.
And we did get a comment about the Box account link. Where is that?
Oh,
yeah, I'm just asking because the only resources I've seen so far, and I've only been to 2 meetings, is just the link that's on the DLCD site for the risk assessment, and I don't see a Box link. And so maybe I'm really missing something.
No, you're not. We have not sent the Box link out.
Okay.
We'll send it out on Tuesday. You'll get an invitation, probably followed by another email, because the Box invitations are limited in how much you can actually put in them. And so then I'll probably follow up with another email with an explanation about what you can do. And the emails will likely come from Ashley. So be looking for that. And then all you have to do is accept the invitation and you're in.
I'll keep my eyes open.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Chris and Sadie, if you want to stay on.